At Dad's retirement gala, he called my sister his only daughter. Then the guest of honor stood up. There's a word my father saves for my sister. He uses it the way some people use the good china, only when it matters, only when there's an audience. He used it at her school plays and her graduation dinner, and now, tonight, into a microphone in front of 80 colleagues who have known him for decades. The word is daughter. I've been watching him say it my whole life. From close up when I was small, from further and further away as the years passed. Tonight I'm watching from table 7, 3 rows back from the head table, in a dress I bought for a work event 3 years ago. I am 32 years old. He is my father. We have the same nose, the same habit of going quiet when we're uncomfortable, the same handwriting. I noticed that once, a long time ago, and never forgot. He has never once called me his daughter in a room full of people. My name is Claire, and this is the night that changed. I should explain why I was there at all. The invitation came by mail, actual paper, in an envelope with my full name typed correctly. Claire Ann Foster. Not Claire, sweetie. Not a text message. A proper card, cream-colored, with the company logo embossed in the corner, and a date and a dress code and an RSVP line. You are cordially invited to celebrate the retirement of Robert Foster after 32 years of distinguished service. 32 years. I noticed that immediately and then tried not to think about it. My mother was the one who pointed it out. I called her when the card arrived and read it to her, and she said, "He started that job 3 months after you were born." She wasn't being cruel. That's just how she is. Factual, precise. She raised me mostly alone after he left, and she never once told me what to think of him. She gave me the facts and let me decide. I decided slowly and over many years that he was a man who meant well and chose comfort. Those two things can both be true. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 11 days. I thought about it on and off, while making coffee, while walking to work, while reviewing quarterly files that weren't particularly complicated, but required the kind of focus that keeps other things out of your head. I wasn't torn, exactly. Torn suggests there were 2 clear options pulling in opposite directions. What I had was more like a question I kept returning to without urgency. My friend Margot was the one who made me decide. I told her about the card on a Tuesday over the phone, and she said, "Are you going?" And I said I didn't know yet. She said, "What would make you not go?" I thought about it for a few seconds. "Nothing," I said. "Nothing would make me not go. I just haven't decided to go yet." "Those are the same thing," she said. She was right. She usually is about these things. What I was looking for when I finally decided was not what most people might assume. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to confront anyone or say anything that needed to be said or draw some kind of line in the room. I was 32 years old, and I was past all of that, past the stage of expecting things to shift. I had been past that stage for a long time. I just wanted to see it once, the full version of the life he had built, the one that didn't include me. I wanted to look at it with adult eyes, because the last time I had seen it up close, I was 17, and I had cried in the parking lot of a closed pharmacy and driven home and not gone back for a very long time. 32 is different from 17. I thought I could handle it. I was mostly right. My parents divorced when I was 7. Before that, my father was simply my father. I don't know how else to say it. He was just there, the way things that matter are there, without requiring attention to their presence. He made pancakes on Saturday mornings. He knew where my other shoe always was, in a way that seemed like a kind of magic because I never knew. He called me Bug, for reasons that were never explained, and that I never asked about. And I think if I had asked, he might not have known either. It was just what he called me. He worked long hours. He came home tired. He still sat on the edge of my bed for a few minutes every night, not always talking, sometimes just there. And that was enough. Children don't ask for much. Presence is most of it. He worked for the same company then as a junior project manager. Sometimes on Saturdays he went in to catch up on work, and sometimes he took me with him. I sat in the corner of his office with whatever I had brought, a book usually, or a notepad for drawing, and he worked at his desk and I worked at mine, which is what it felt like sitting in that chair with my small project while he had his large one. His colleagues would come in and find me there and say, "Is that your daughter?" And he would say, without looking up, "Yes, that's my Claire," and go back to what he was doing. That simple sentence, the casual ownership of it. I drew horses mostly. I had a phase with horses. I was not skilled, but I was very serious about it. My mother always said that about me, that I was a serious child, that I approached things with more deliberateness than seemed warranted. I drew horses with the same focus my father gave his quarterly reports, which I found entirely reasonable. I don't know exactly when he stopped saying it. My Claire. It wasn't a single moment. It was a direction he moved in, 1 degree at a time, for 25 years. But when I look back at that office, at the chair in the corner and the notepad and the Saturday light coming through the window, I think that was the last version of him I knew without any asterisk attached. The divorce was not dramatic. I learned later that many aren't, that most of them are just two people who stopped trying around the same time and finally admitted it. My parents were kind to each other afterward in the careful way of people who are exhausted and relieved. No shouting, no scenes I had to witness. They told me together at the kitchen table on a Thursday afternoon in October, when the light was already going early and the kitchen smelled like whatever my mother had been cooking before she called me in. I was eating cereal. It wasn't a cereal time of day, but I had asked for it and she had said yes in the distracted way she had sometimes when her mind was already somewhere else. My father said, "Your mom and I have decided that we're going to live in different houses." I remember looking at the cereal. He said, "Nothing is going to change with us. You'll still see me all the time." I was 7 years old. I believed him. The first year, he kept his word. He rented an apartment 20 minutes from the house, and I went there every Friday after school and came back Sunday evening. It was a small apartment, sparsely furnished in the way of someone who moved quickly and didn't prioritize comfort. A couch, a kitchen table, 2 chairs, a blow-up mattress in the second bedroom that he replaced with a real bed after the first few weekends. He bought the same cereal I liked. He learned to braid hair badly, which I told him every time, and he agreed every time, and tried again the next weekend. It was different, but it was still him. I adapted the way children adapt, by accepting the new geometry and finding where I fit in it. Then, in the spring, when I was 8, he introduced me to Diana. He didn't introduce us exactly. What he did was say, on a Thursday phone call, "A friend of mine is going to join us for dinner on Friday," and Diana was there when I arrived. She was pleasant. She had dark hair and good manners, and she asked about school in the way adults ask about school when they're trying to make an impression on a child. Attentive, a little formal, I said thank you for the things she said and spent the rest of the evening being carefully polite. She was there the next weekend, too, and the one after that. By that summer, she had a drawer in the apartment. By fall, she was simply present the way furniture becomes present. Part of the room, no longer requiring acknowledgement. I kept being polite. I didn't dislike her. She'd not done anything unkind to me. She was a woman who had come into my father's life and understood, with the quiet intelligence of someone who pays attention, exactly how to stay there. I was 8 years old, and I didn't have words for what I was watching. I just watched. He married her 2 years later. I was 9. I was the flower girl. I wore a dress with an itchy collar, and I held a basket of petals, and I walked down the aisle. And there are photographs of all of this somewhere in Diana's house, in an album I have never been invited to look through. At the reception, someone came up to Diana and gestured toward me and asked, "Is this your daughter?" Diana smiled, warm and practiced, and said, "This is Robert's daughter, from before." From before. I was 9 years old and I filed that phrase somewhere without understanding exactly why. The following year, Diana had a baby. I was 10 years old and my mother called me in from outside and handed me the phone. My father's voice was different on that call. Lighter, faster, the way people sound when something happens that they can't quite contain. He said, "You have a little sister." He said her name was Sophie. He said, "You're gonna love her." I said, "Congratulations." He said something else I don't remember, and then we hung up and I went back outside and sat on the porch steps. It was spring. The maple in the front yard was doing what it does in spring, which is to say it was full and complicated, and going about its business without any awareness of what had just shifted inside the house behind me. I sat there for a while. I was 10 years old, and I understood, without anyone explaining it, that the apartment now had a baby in it, that the geometry had changed again. And this time, the new shape was complete. It wasn't a triangle with a missing piece. It was something whole, a family unit with a father and a mother and an infant daughter, and a place at the edge of it for me on alternate weekends. I kept going, Friday to Sunday. The apartment was the same apartment, the same distance from my mother's house, but it was different in the way a room is different when something has recently happened in it. Sophie slept in the room that had been mine, in a crib with a mobile that turned slowly. We kept the voices down on Saturday mornings. Then Sophie was awake, and the focus went where focus goes when there is a new baby, which is entirely to the baby as it should be. And I sat in the corner with my book and was good, so good, because that was how I knew to be useful. That was how I had always known to be useful. I want to be careful here, because I'm not interested in making this into something it wasn't. Diana never said anything cruel to me. My father never told me I wasn't welcome. Nothing was ever said directly because nothing needed to be. The shift was ambient. It was in how long it took him to come to the door when I arrived. It was in the way the refrigerator held food that Sophie liked, in the way dinner conversation moved naturally around her, and I moved naturally with it, finding my footing in the margins. I was 15 when I started going less often. It wasn't a conversation. There was no fight, no dramatic evening where something was said that couldn't be unsaid. I just started saying I had plans, school things, a friend's birthday, a project that was due, and he said fine, and the weekends spaced out, and after a while they were every other week, and then once a month, and then less. He didn't push back on any of it. That's the part I couldn't have named at 15, but understand clearly now. He accepted each excuse without resistance, and that acceptance was its own kind of answer. There was a company picnic the summer I was 16, a big outdoor event at a park with catered food and a rented tent. My father brought all of us. We walked across the grass toward a group of his colleagues, and one of them, a man in a red tie who had the comfortable energy of someone who makes friends easily, came forward and said, "Robert, introduce us." My father said, "This is Diana, my wife, and this is Sophie, my daughter." He looked at me then, a half-second pause, and Claire. Just Claire. No context, no possessive, just the name, floating there, unattached to anything in the sentence. The man in the red tie looked at me pleasantly and shook my hand and moved on. I got a soda from the cooler. I stood next to Sophie, who was 6 that summer and liked holding hands, and I held her hand because she asked me to, and I did not let myself think about what had just happened. I want to be precise about what I understood. He didn't do it with cruelty. There was no hesitation of calculation, no deliberate exclusion. It was something worse than that. It was reflex. Diana was his wife. Sophie was his daughter. And I was Claire, who was there, who required an introduction but not a category. I was 16 years old in that park, and I decided, without announcing it to anyone, that I would stop expecting the introduction to be different. There was a Saturday the following year. Sophie was 7. I had just turned 17. When she asked me to see her room, and I said yes. It was a small room, decorated with the particular intensity of a 7-year-old who has been given full authority over the space. Posters, a string of lights, a shelf of things that mattered to her that she explained one by one. She had a stuffed rabbit named Gerald, who'd been with her since she was 2. She showed me Gerald with the same seriousness I had brought to horses, and I took him in my hands and said he seemed like a good rabbit, and she said he was. Then she asked me something that I have thought about since. She said, "How come you don't live here all the time?" She wasn't asking to be unkind. She was 7. She had grown up with a certain shape to her family, her parents, herself, and this older girl who came and went on a schedule nobody explained. She just wanted to understand the geography. I said that my mom lived in a different house and I lived with her most of the time. Sophie considered this. She said, "But your dad's too, right?" I said yes. She handed Gerald back to me, thinking it over. Then she moved on to the next thing on the shelf, a ceramic elephant, and started explaining where it came from. She had accepted the answer without trouble, the way children accept things that don't seem to have a solution. Simply, and then forward. I held Gerald for a moment longer than I needed to, and then I put him back on the shelf. At 16, I went once a month, maybe less. I was doing well in school by then. I had found that numbers made sense to me in a particular way, that accounting had the same quality as drawing horses when I was 6, which was that it rewarded patience and precision and didn't ask you to be anything other than thorough. My mother noticed this and said nothing about it, which was her way of saying she approved. She was not a woman who congratulated you for doing what you were already doing correctly. When I was 17, I went to his house for Christmas dinner. Diana's parents were there. Sophie's godmother, a woman I'd seen twice, a cousin from Diana's side who I'd never met. Someone had set a place for me at the table, which I noticed without comment. I ate. I helped clear the plates afterward and wash the serving dishes because there was a rhythm to that kind of work, and I was glad for it. My father hugged me at the door when I left and said, "Same time next year." I drove home. It was 45 minutes, late, very little traffic. I pulled into the parking lot of a pharmacy that had already closed for the night, and I sat in the car for 20 minutes. I don't know exactly what I was doing. Not crying at first, then crying, then not anymore. Then I drove the rest of the way home. I didn't go back for Christmas the following year. He didn't call to ask why. I told myself that was its own kind of answer too, and I let it be enough, because it was the only thing available. He told people, I learned later from an aunt who meant well but didn't think carefully about what she was passing along, that I had chosen not to be part of the family, that teenagers pull away, that it was natural, that he had tried, but I wasn't interested. He wasn't lying exactly. I had pulled away. But the pulling was in response to something, and by then, he had long since stopped looking at what that something was. In my 20s, I built a life that had nothing to do with waiting for him to notice. I studied accounting and did well, and joined a firm where I was good at my job, which is all I had ever wanted from work. To be good at the thing, to have the work make sense, to go home at the end of the day knowing that what I had done was right. I got my own apartment. High ceilings, east-facing windows, a kitchen that gets cold in winter in the particular way of old buildings that suits me more than it should. My father and I had a form of contact, birthdays, a text at Christmas. 2 or 3 phone calls a year that followed the same shape. He asked about work. I answered. I asked about his. He told me something about the company or a project, and then one of us had somewhere to be. Sophie's name came up regularly in those calls. Her university program, a trip she'd taken, a promotion, an apartment she was looking at. He talked about her the way parents talk about the child whose life is unfolding in front of them daily, which is to say, with the fluency of someone who knows all the details and doesn't have to summarize. He never asked much about mine. There was a call, when I was 28, that I think about sometimes as a kind of summary. He called on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. He rarely called outside of birthdays and the brief December exchange. He was calling because Sophie had gotten engaged. He told me about it in the way he had always talked about her. Fluently, with detail, with the ease of someone recounting something they had watched and thought about and were genuinely delighted by. He told me about the restaurant where it happened, a place downtown that had been her favorite since college. He told me the ring had been her grandmother's, Diana's mother's, which had been in a drawer for years waiting for this. He told me Sophie had called him right after, still in the restaurant, crying happy and talking too fast. He talked for close to 15 minutes. At the end, he said, "How are things with you?" I said things were good. I had recently moved to a new firm and the work was interesting, but I didn't say that part. He said, "Good, good." And then someone called him from the other room, Diana, I think, calling about something. And he said he had to go, and we said goodbye. And that was it. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after. The call had been complete. It had a purpose, and the purpose had been served. Sophie was engaged, and he had called to tell me, which was the kind of thing a father does when his daughter has news. I was the last 30 seconds of it. The obligatory close, the "how are you" that wasn't really a question. There was nothing cruel in it. It was just the shape of us. I put the phone down and went back to what I'd been doing. I'm not telling this to be sad about it. I'm telling it so the picture is complete. Because what happened at that gala in November didn't come from nowhere. It came from 25 years of small choices, his and mine, that had brought us to 3 tables apart in the same room. The card arrived on a Tuesday, 11 days before I decided to go. I bought a train ticket for a Saturday evening in November. I left my apartment at 4 in the afternoon in the dress from 3 years ago and took the train for 40 minutes and walked 2 blocks to the hotel and gave my name at the door. The woman found it on the list. Claire Foster right there, between a colleague named Fletcher and someone named Garza. I went in. The room was large and warmly lit. Round tables with white cloths, arrangements of white flowers, a bar along the far wall, a small stage at the front with a podium and the company banner behind it. 80 people, maybe a few more. The low sound of a room that has been filling up for an hour, conversation and glasses and the occasional laugh. His world. 32 years of it. I got a drink at the bar and stood with it for a few minutes near the edge of the room. There is a particular experience of being at a party where everyone else belongs in a way that you don't. Not because you're unwelcome, but because the shared history that makes a room cohere is not your history. People were greeting each other with the ease of long familiarity, using names, referencing things. I watched a man put his hand on my father's shoulder from behind, and my father turn and light up, and the two of them shake hands for a moment longer than a handshake requires. 32 years of that, of building something with people, of becoming known in a particular way inside a particular world. I had been 16 years old at a company picnic, drinking a soda by a cooler, holding Sophie's hand because she asked me to. That was the extent of my experience of his professional life. A man came to the bar to refill his glass and stood briefly next to me and asked how I was connected to Robert. I said I was his daughter. He said, "Oh, I didn't know he had another one," and then registered what he had said and began to correct himself, and I told him it was fine, which it was. It is simply the accurate description of my position in the room. He moved on. I finished my drink and found table 7. I sat down. The woman to my left introduced herself as Patricia. She worked in procurement and had known my father for 18 years. She asked what my connection was to Robert. I said he was my father. She said, "Oh, wonderful. Are you in the industry?" I said no, accounting, a different firm. She nodded and turned to someone on her other side. I looked at the head table. My father was there, in a dark suit, talking to the man beside him with the ease of someone in his element. Diana was on his left, composed and familiar in this setting, and Sophie was on his right, 22 years old in something blue, talking to the person next to her and laughing at something. I watched my father look at her. It was the look he had when he didn't know anyone was watching, unhurried, uncomplicated. The look of someone who finds what they're seeing genuinely good. I had seen it somewhere before, a long time ago, and it took me a moment to place it, and when I did, I put it away again because there was nothing useful in following that thread. Dinner was served. I ate. Patricia's daughter was getting married in March, and I heard about the venue and the flowers and the disagreement over the guest list, and I said the right things at the right moments, because that is not a difficult skill if you are willing to pay attention to someone who wants to be heard. I kept looking at the head table when I had reason to glance that direction. There was a moment, just before the speeches started, when the room was shifting from dinner to formality, when my father looked out at the tables, scanning, the way you scan a room when you're about to speak, checking that the people you need to see are where they should be. His eyes moved across table after table. They moved across mine, not a pause, not a flicker. He kept going. I moved my water glass slightly to the left and looked at Patricia's profile and waited for the speeches to begin. I understood something, sitting there, that I hadn't quite understood before. Not fully. Not in the particular way that sometimes requires being in the room for it to settle. This was not a story about a man who had chosen one daughter over another. That framing was too clean, too purposeful. It suggested a moment of decision, a crossroads, a deliberate turning away. What I was looking at was something more ordinary than that, and in some ways harder to hold in your hands. He had started over. He had found, in his late 30s, a version of his life that was warm and present and uncomplicated, and he had lived inside it. The first family, the before, had become something that existed in a past tense that didn't require regular maintenance. I was in that past tense, and when I stopped coming around at 15, at 16, at 17, it was easier for him to reach for an explanation that made the absence make sense. She chose this. Teenagers pull away. I tried. He wasn't lying to himself. He had tried, in the way that people try when they don't really believe the effort will change anything. And I had made his explanation true by eventually doing what he had always assumed I would do. The thing I hadn't understood until that room was that there was no villain in it. Diana had wanted a complete family and had built one. Sophie had grown up inside it, innocent of everything, knowing her father as the father he actually was to her. And Robert had made the choices that were easiest to make, one at a time, over 25 years. And here he was, 60 years old, beloved by his colleagues, surrounded by his family, his life coherent and whole. I had made my own choices too. I had built a life that didn't depend on being included in his. My apartment, my work, my east-facing window. Those were not consolation prizes. They were what I had, and they were real, and they were mine. I was not angry. I had expected to be, had half expected to find in that room some residue of the feeling that had sat in my chest for years. But what I found instead was something quieter, a kind of recognition. I knew this story. I had always known it. I just hadn't stood in it from the outside before. The speeches started at 8:30. A man from the board spoke first, brief, formal, the kind of speech that is really just a list of achievements connected by verbs. Then a colleague who had started the same year as my father, someone named Barton from a department I didn't know, who told a story about a project in 1997 that made the room laugh with the warmth of shared memory. Then my father stood. He thanked the board by name. He thanked his team, several of them individually, with the easy fluency of someone who has thought about what he wants to say. He said it had been the privilege of his working life. He said he was looking forward to what came next. He looked at Diana and said she had supported him through every difficult year and every good one. And Diana touched his arm and smiled the way she always smiled in this particular kind of moment. Measured, warm, entirely composed. Then he looked at Sophie. "My daughter," he said, "who makes me proud every single day." Sophie pressed her lips together. Her eyes went bright. She nodded once, small, trying to hold it together. The room made a sound, warm, collective, approving. The sound of 80 people who have been at company events long enough to recognize a genuine moment. I was 3 tables back. He went back to his notes. A few more remarks about the company's direction, about the people who would carry it forward. He thanked everyone for coming. He sat down. Patricia touched my arm, Briefly, without comment, in the absent way of someone responding to something they can't quite identify, I move my water glass slightly to the left. Walter Hines was introduced as the founding partner, 40 years with the company, the man who had built the institution my father had spent his career inside. He was 71. He moved to the podium slowly, in the unhurried way of someone who has long since stopped performing urgency. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the room. He spoke about the company, the early years, the decisions that had shaped it, names from the founding that meant nothing to me, but clearly meant something to the people around me who had been there. He talked about Robert's tenure, a restructuring that had frightened everyone and that Robert had navigated steadily, a period of growth that he had helped consolidate. He talked about Robert the way you talk about someone you have watched for a long time and have a particular respect for, not effusively, just accurately. Then he paused. He looked at the note card in his hand and put it face down on the podium. "I want to say one more thing," he said, "that's not in any report." He mentioned a Saturday, sometime around 2000, Robert coming in to catch up on paperwork as he often did on Saturdays in those years, bringing a small child with him. 6 or 7, Walter thought. She had sat in the corner of Robert's office with a notepad and spent the better part of 2 hours drawing horses. "I came in to find Robert," Walter said, "and I found both of them in there working. The girl was very serious about the horses. I asked her what she was drawing." A pause. She held it up. It was a horse, obviously a horse. She was 6 years old and she already had the patience to do a thing right. He said nothing else about it. He picked up the note card, looked at it, and finished with a line about the company's future that I didn't catch. He didn't say my name. He didn't know I was in the room. My father was looking at the tablecloth. Not at Diana, not at Sophie, at the tablecloth directly in front of him where his hands were folded, very still. Walter raised his glass. The room raised theirs. I picked up my water glass and raised it too. I left before dessert. Not dramatically. I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. I said goodnight to Patricia, who said it was lovely to meet me, and I walked out the side door into the hotel corridor and from there to the street. It was November and cold, and the pavement held that damp quality that evenings in November have, where the cold isn't just in the air, but in the ground and the walls, and everything you put your hand against. I stood there for a moment and breathed. I thought about the notepad, the horses. I had completely forgotten about them. The Saturday mornings in the corner of his office, drawing whatever I felt like drawing while he worked. I had not thought about those Saturdays in years. They had been too ordinary to hold on to, too routine to have seemed significant at the time. But Walter Hines had held on to them. He had carried that image of a serious, quiet child for 25 years, through restructurings and board meetings and 40 years of quarterly reports, and brought it into a room tonight without knowing what he was carrying. My father had been looking at the tablecloth. I don't know what was in his head at that moment. Maybe something that would have been useful 20 years ago and wasn't anymore. Maybe less than that. I found I didn't need to know. I took the train home. 40 minutes, a window seat, the city moving past in the dark in the particular way it moves when you're not looking at it directly, peripheral and fast and lit up in patches. I put my head back and closed my eyes for part of it. I got home at 10:45. I made tea. I stood at the east-facing window with the mug in both hands, looking at the street below, the parked cars, the yellow light from the apartment across the way, a person walking a dog in the cold. I stayed there until the tea was gone. My father is retired now. He has his life. Diana, Sophie, the house they've kept for 20 years, whatever the next chapter holds. The story he tells about his career is a true story. A good company, 32 years, a man who showed up and did the work and earned the room full of people at the end of it. In that story, there is a first marriage and a daughter who grew up and didn't stay close, and that is true as far as it goes. I am 32 years old. I have my apartment and my work and my east-facing windows. For a long time, I wanted to be his. I'm not sure exactly when I stopped wanting that. It wasn't a decision I made, more a direction I moved in, quietly, 1 degree at a time, somewhere between 17 and now, somewhere between a parking lot and a hotel ballroom and a train home in November. I'm not looking for it anymore. That's enough.